Thing here. Okay. I had a better turnout today than I thought because of the holiday. I told people that we're deferring the discussion board on fog of war to Wednesday because of the religious holiday. So you have until Wednesday to do it. Please, if you haven't watched the movie, it's a great movie. Wednesday night. And I hope it gets you to think a little bit about negotiation and conflict. Um, when I graded your discussions on Moneyball, which were very good, I um, I noticed there were people relying on Chat GPT for their answers. Uh, Partially, you can tell kind of it has a certain style that you can detect, but you can also just ask it if it wrote something. So I did that. I asked, whether things were written, and about a third of the cases it said yes. Now, of course, you can use ChatGPT and then rewrite it, which is fine. But I shouldn't be able to tell that it was from ChatGPT. And I hope you're not like using it as a substitute for watching the movie. That would be tragic. So like, it knows the plots of the movies, and you can ask it that, but you're certainly not gaining anything that way. It's just a way to go through the motions. But if you do use ChatGPT to help you with an answer, you got to rewrite it. Otherwise, people will know that you're using it. So basically, today we're going to talk about conflict and negotiation, which I started last time, and we're going to continue through with that. I'm surprised the attendance so strong in this class. I thought there were a number of people going to be absent because of the religious holiday, but I guess it's fewer than I thought. So in any case, I'll start with a discussion of um, uh, conflict and negotiation. I think ChatGPT kind of illustrates a certain kind of conflict. I mean, is conflict good or bad for an organization? Anyone want to take a stab at answering that? How about David? Is conflict good or bad for the organization?
Can I answer this?
Yeah, go right ahead, Emmanuel. That's fine.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just thinking about this. If it's like a personal conflict, I think it definitely hurts the work environment. But if the
Good.
conflict is about like a very specific subject, like their work, I think it makes the work stronger in the end if there's a conflict
Very good.
because
Okay,
because
that's
just
the
not like an
textbook.
idea going unopposed.
Excellent, excellent. That's the textbook answer, and I think that's a true answer. It depends. A lot depends on what the effects of the conflict are and how good. I mean, ChatGPT results in a lot of conflicts. There are schools that have said you're not allowed to use it. If you're caught using it, you'll fail. I think it was actually banned in a school system in, was it France or some place? I can't remember now, but I heard somewhere that somebody's school system, some country's school system, actually legalized Chat GPT. That anyone who uses it is violating uh, some rule. And so basically, I think that's a mistake. Technology always results in Are there really, oh, some questions here. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Is it? Yes, the movie is available. You may be able to get it on YouTube for free if you haven't seen it yet. Um, I haven't checked that, but it may be available on YouTube. If not, it's on Amazon Video for sure. Um, the first half that I got through was very interesting. Some really good points. Are there really over 16 countries? Yeah, there's a lot of countries that have nuclear weapons. I don't know the exact number. It's probably bigger now than when the movie was made. We can, that's something that you can Google. Let's see, number of countries with nuclear weapons. All right, I don't know anything about ICANN, but all right. So as you can see, there's I see here 7. So I don't know about 16. Uh, but the number's increasing for sure. North Korea, Israel, India, Pakistan, UK, France, China, United States, and Russia. So that makes 9, I see. Um, so one nuclear weapon, according to these people, one nuclear weapon, these people say 9 altogether, would cause 5,800,000, no, I'm sorry, yeah, 583,160 fatalities in one bomb. So this is serious stuff. And it kind of illustrates in an extreme way what the cost of conflict can be. We'll talk about that today, like that conflict is good if it can be resolved through negotiation. If you use terminal methods, like forcing methods of conflict resolution, or you use some kind of uh, you might call it impasse, forcible impasse solutions, where you're not able to negotiate and then you use a forcing approach. It could be a strike. It doesn't have to be war. It could be things like a strike or a strike, a labor strike or a lawsuit. These all have a lot in common in the sense that you're compelling the other side to do something using resources, and it's always a mistake. The labor economist Sir John Hicks realized in the 1940s that strikes in labor settings are always a mistake, because if you get a solution, if the strike is resolved and there's a certain level of pay, and benefits that came out of it, that could have been negotiated without the strike. So it's always less costly to negotiate. And I think that's the message of the film The Fog of War, that um, when we did negotiate in the Cuban Missile Crisis, that there was no cost and lives weren't lost. There was some minor loss of face on especially for Khrushchev, but it was very minor, and we compensated for it by moving missiles out of Turkey. And he could then say that he forced us to move missiles out of Turkey. If there had been a war, the costs would have been catastrophic. He makes that clear, that there were enough nuclear warheads in on Cuba, on Cuban soil, to pretty much obliterate the whole East Coast. So if we had attacked, it would have been a mess. as an understatement. And so basically, the ideal is to avoid war. And this is the message in the great Chinese classic from ancient China, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And basically, the art of war depicts the best generals are those who can avoid fighting by understanding who's going to win the war in advance. In other words, if you can tell in advance who's going to win. And he talks about strategic assessments. He says there's 5 strategic assessments. The terrain, the weather, which has better generals, which side has more discipline and better human resource management, if you will. They didn't have that term, obviously, in those days, but that's what we call it now. And who who has the support of the population. It can be translated as the way, the Taoist concept of the way, and the general support of the people. And in Vietnam, I mean, part of the reason we lost the Vietnam War was the public didn't support, or at least a large section of the public didn't support it, resulting in the resignation of Lyndon Johnson in '68. He didn't run again. He didn't resign. He just didn't run again. And so basically, the huge cost of Vietnam. The most serious one is it may be that as many as 1 million people died in the bombing, and 2 million, I think it was, died on both sides among the Vietnamese, a great tragedy. Of course, in World War II, the death count was much bigger. It was a bigger conflict, but I mean, 2 million is huge. And so these kinds of costs can be avoided through negotiation. And so, of course, in our own lives, negotiation doesn't have that big implications as it does for, in the context of the Secretary of Defense and the president. But it does have big implications for us too, because like the kind of salary we get, how much we pay for a house, how much we pay for a car, the kind of house we're able to buy, all of these things are going to be affected by our ability to negotiate. And so business is heavily dependent on negotiation. I mean, a lot of the best business people who are the most successful were great negotiators. Just a few examples. I mean, Bill Gates would not have been the founder of the dominant PC software company if he hadn't been a great negotiator. That was the total reason for his success. Sam Walton's entire business plan for Walmart was based on negotiation. And the reason they were able to charge lower prices was in large part their ability to negotiate with their suppliers. In the case of Bernie Arnault, who's currently the richest man in the world right now, his ability to negotiate the purchases of major luxury goods suppliers, stores like Tiffany's, for which he paid something like half price, meant that he became extremely wealthy by negotiating good deals. And so all of this is foundational for business. It's also foundational, I think, for almost everything in the world. What kind of foreign policy a country has, how successful a country is economically has a lot to do with it. And the reverse is true. If conflict gets turned into something that's forcing or violent, or a lawsuit or a strike, this impoverishes you. So in other words, what you could say overall is that if you look at sort of a model, you could say, I'm just going to clear the screen for a second. If you look at a model, you could say, okay, so the y-axis is performance with a P, and the x-axis is conflict with a C. And you could argue that a mid-range of conflict is optimal. Okay, so the mid-range of conflict is optimal. So what that means is that what Emmanuel said is that if you are able to have conflict without hard feelings, and so you can debate the task and not turn it into a major political issue, that then results in optimal performance. And I think a good example of that is the use of ChatGPT, what I started out talking about. So in other words, if you look at colleges, for example, I've been reading a little in the paper, and some colleges have said you can't use it at all. Other colleges have said you can use it, but you need to, work with it or some such thing. And then other colleges, probably the majority, just haven't discussed it. And I think if you don't discuss it, it takes on a life of its own, and people do whatever they want. If you ban it completely, I think you're being an ostrich, you're putting your head in the sand and not dealing with real progress. What I think an optimal solution is to test different approaches and see what works the best. Now, I don't think just copying an answer from ChatGPT and pasting it is going to work. It certainly doesn't help you in any sense. But I think there's ways to use ChatGPT that can supplement your reading and help you write and help you deal with things. And so in my own case, my wife is starting a coaching business, and I'm helping her, and we're putting together a website. And basically, I read a book or two, and I've got some things she wrote, and I'm going to combine it into like what she calls a landing page, which is just like a paragraph. And so, like, an easy way to do it is to feed some excerpts from the book I've read, and feed some of her stuff, and then tell ChatGPT to boil it down into a paragraph and see what it does, and then I can run with that. And so basically, you can use it as a tool. I think the mistake a lot of students make, and I think this is one of the great tragedies of the last 20 years, and it affects a lot of you directly, is that people didn't consider what the effects of technology are on human abilities, and the excessive addiction in some cases. I'm not saying everybody, but the excessive addiction to social media and smartphones was something that I don't think anyone expected, and I think it is a true negative. Technology doesn't have to be good. I mean, the effects of technology can be not good. It depends on the technology. But one thing that I think is false is the claim that this AI stuff is going to, or other technologies are going to completely eliminate employment. That's simply unlikely. It's very, very, very unlikely. And the reason is that, first of all, I asked ChatGPT about myself. I asked it who is Mitchell Langbert, and it gave me, the first time I did it in November, it didn't give me an answer. It didn't know. Then when I did it last week, it did, but it gave wrong information. So in other words, it said wrong things about me. It said it's, for instance, it said that it didn't name the right school, it named it incorrect school that I attended, for one thing. So basically, it's far from a perfect system at this point. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of improvement, of course, but I don't think it's going to get to the point where it can replace somebody who's an expert in a subject, in part because it doesn't at this point. I'm not saying it'll never. I'm saying at this point will never. I'm saying at this point, not never. It doesn't have the ability to weight information sources well, and so it reflects. It also reflects the biases of the people. Of the people programming it. So you're going to get you're going to give a biased answer, and it's going to be biased in ways that you don't know because you don't know the people that have biased it. And that can often be worse than no answer. So I think there are a lot of reasons why you need to be careful about how you use ChatGPT. I wouldn't rely on it and assume that everything it says is true, uh, because it may not be true. And I saw that firsthand. And second of all, I don't think you can expect it to give you fair information. There's no reason to expect that. So basically, you need to be able to use it rather than allow it to use you. I think for a lot of my students, they are used by the cell phone. The cell phone uses them. Whereas there's still time to make up your mind that you're not going to allow Chat GPT to use you, and instead use it as a tool. It should be your tool rather than the other way around. So basically, then we talked last time, as Emmanuel said, that there are different types of conflict, and relationship conflict focuses on people, and that's usually a bad kind, whereas task conflict focuses on the task, and that's a good kind. Uh, the type of people are going to affect conflict. Human characteristics and human behavior is going to affect conflict, and the appearance of conditions will affect conflict. How you communicate will affect conflict. The structure of a negotiation or the organizational structure will affect conflict. Personal variables will also affect the degree to which there's conflict and how you negotiate it. People can perceive a conflict, but it doesn't have to be that both sides see the conflict. It could be that one side sees a conflict or another side sees a conflict. And perceived conflict is an awareness by one or more parties of a potential conflict. And if people start to feel conflict, felt conflict is an emotional involvement. And usually the more emotional it gets, the worse the conflict resolution will be. Negative emotions, especially, lead us to oversimplify issues, to lose trust, and to put negative interpretations on the other party's behavior. The Thomas Kilmann conflict resolution approaches are important, and I talk about them in almost every class. I'm putting this on the whiteboard. Let me clear it. So what these 5 dimensions are first of all, one way, so these are ways to resolve conflict. And one way is forcing, which I talked about. And usually it could be that one side has more power than another. If it's a clear-cut difference, then forcing is good. For instance, if your boss says to you to do something, you don't agree with it, your boss could say, do it or you're fired. And that will motivate you to do it. Now, it may be a mistake to do that for other reasons. For instance, you might say, I'm going to sabotage it, or I'm going to, I'm going to do it, but not in the best way. And I think part of the reason employees get demotivated is they don't necessarily agree with what the boss says. But so forcing, even in the case where a party has more power than the other, can have detrimental results. But I think if you do use it, it's going to be where one party has more power, the issue is unimportant, or there's a short time horizon. In 12 o'clock high, he used forcing approaches because the situation was so negative and there was very little choice. Um, that's understandable, but in general, that type of tough approach doesn't work that well. The reverse of forcing is accommodating. So you do what the other party wants, you go along with it, you avoid the conflict. If you have less power, it's the reverse. So if you have less power, you probably should be accommodating. Number three is avoiding. That you avoid conflict most of the time because it's not worth your time to engage in it. So if you're in a car and somebody cuts you off, you don't turn it into a conflict, hopefully. There are plenty of stories of road rage and things like that, but that's foolish. Basically, for where there's very little gain to be derived from a conflict, it doesn't really make sense to have the conflict. So somebody jostles you on the subway, you just say, excuse me, and you move away. You don't try to deal with it. The fourth kind, compromising, is where you split the difference. So once one party wants, let's say you're in a labor negotiation, one side wants a 10% raise and the other side wants to give a 5% raise. So, you could turn it into a major war and say we're going to go on strike or something. But an easier way is to simply compromise. Say, all right, you want to give 5%, we want 10%, we'll split the difference, 7.5%. All right, so that's often for small issues, for issues that are difficult to resolve. That's often the best way. And lastly, the one way that's win-win is collaborating. And what I mean by that is that in collaborating, both sides try to make each other better off. So if you look at it as a graph, I think I can put it on the side here. So you look at, oops, you look at it as a graph. You have two parties, A and B, who are negotiating. In the first four methods, especially 1 and 2, but also 4 and also 3, one side's gain is the other side's loss. So if B gets an additional unit, A loses a unit. So if the settlement is here, A does a little better and B does worse. And if the settlement is here, B does a little better and A does worse. It goes down for A, it goes up for B, and that's win-lose. So the first 4, forcing, accommodating, avoiding, and compromising, are all win-lose approaches. The fifth one, I'm going to clear the screen. The fifth one was recognized by Mary Parker Follett, I might have mentioned before, who was an early management theorist, part of the progressive era. And she argued, among other things, management is getting things done through people. And she also introduced the idea of integrative bargaining, which is the same thing as collaborating or win-win negotiation. And basically, that idea was carried forward by in the 1950s by Walton and McKersey in a book of behavioral theory of labor negotiation. And they argued in that book that there are they observed a lot of labor negotiators, and they argued that there are four methods of negotiation in labor settings. And these are distributive, integrative, which we talked about already, win-lose and win-win, attitudinal structuring, which means that the sides influence each other to transition from distributive to integrative. And finally, intra-organizational, which means that both sides have to go back to their parties, that the management side has to convince top management, the labor side has to convince the rank and file that the negotiation is beneficial and should be agreed to. Okay, so that idea then was carried forward in the famous book by Fisher and Urey, especially the idea of integrative. Fisher and Urey, getting to yes. And I recommend it. It's an excellent book. Walton and McKersey is more of historical interest, unless you're majoring in labor issues. Fisher and Urey is highly practical. And one of your fellow Brooklyn College attendees named George Ross, who was the general counsel of the Trump organization for many years, the real estate business. He's come to my class a number of times. He's written on negotiation. He is highly critical of Fisher and Urey. He disagrees with it and argues that the only real negotiation is distributive. I think that's false. I mean, I think you'll see in the movie that if you take that philosophy, you get into a lot of trouble. You know, if the only solution tool you have is distributive bargaining, then you don't resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis in a friendly way. You resolve it in a forcing way, and you don't want that to happen. So I disagree, but I think George is a master at distributive bargaining. He's very good at it, but I think it also results in unethical outcomes. You know, and one of the things that the Trump organization did was it didn't pay its suppliers. You know, and I know this from personal experience because my ex-wife was a trial attorney who represented the Trump organization in an appeal, and her law firm at that time, I won't tell you the name of it, I could, her law firm at that time won, and she wrote the appeal. So I heard about this every day for back in the 1980s, wrote an appeal on behalf of Trump organization. They won the appeal, and then they didn't get paid. I don't know if it was George, it probably was, simply didn't pay my wife. Not my wife, it was her firm, but she had written the appeal. And what they said to them was, well, now you can tell people you represented the Trump organization, so we don't need to pay you. And this is unethical. This is wrong. Now, you might say, why not sue? The reason you don't sue is that lawyers understand, which a lot of people don't, that forcing solutions are often more expensive than the gain from uh, from the here, I'll stop the share, the gain from the forcing approach. So like, basically, if you fight a war, if you knew the outcome of the war in advance, you could have saved a lot of people's lives by not fighting the war. Okay, so um, the simple fact is that um, there's always a better way than uh, ending impasses through some kind of direct conflict. And so lawyers know this because they're the ones who benefit from the mistakes people make. People who want to litigate all the time end up paying a lot of money. And Dickens, Charles Dickens, wrote a book called Bleak House about that very subject, about two rich families. One is in a fox hunt, and they chase the fox onto the other party's land. They kill the fox. Then the party who owned the land where they killed the fox sues the other party. It becomes like emotional conflict that lasts for generations and ultimately bankrupts both families, enriching the lawyers in the end. And of course, the fox itself had no value whatsoever. And this is often the case with conflict. That conflict is good because you can't have innovation without conflict. All new ideas have conflict. They generate conflict. The person who invented the wheel was probably burned at the stake by the other people in his tribe because it changed the way they wanted to do things, and it was a major threat. And all new technologies, all new ideas have that quality. So that's part of the reason why you don't want to put politicians in charge of the economy, because they're simply too stupid to be able to apprehend. And I'm not blaming them as a profession. I'm just saying all humans are. And so basically, new ideas are always going to generate conflict. And the way to resolve it is through open debate and economic competition. And the way you do that is through a free market approach. So basically, you can view conflict as pursuing a process. First, there are preconditions for the conflict, and there's communication, there's structure, there's personal variables that come into play. Somebody perceives a conflict, and the perceived conflict is just an awareness by one or more parties that there may be a conflict. If it becomes emotional, if there's felt conflict and there's emotional involvement, obviously it's going to become more intense, and often it will result in worse outcomes, because the more negative a conflict is, the more negative the emotions are, I mean to say, the worse the outcome is going to be. It's going to become more person oriented, more personal, and negative emotions will lead us to oversimplify the issues, to lose trust, put negative interpretations on the other party's behavior, to look to destroy the other party rather than to resolve the conflict. And often political arguments take on this quality. I think you can see this in public life. In fact, one of the great authors on political conflict was the activist Saul Alinsky, who wrote the book. He wrote an earlier book, Reveille for Radicals, but his better book is Rules for Radicals. And he talks in there about how people in a less powerful setting can overcome more powerful people. And he gives a lot of ideas about that. But the end result of the techniques he advocates is that it's radical. You try to destroy the other party, basically. you try to destroy them, to like totally weaken them, take away their defenses, and then annihilate them. And the way you do that is, he's got a series of ideas, but you use media. A big part of it is the availability of modern media. And you turn issues into a moral conflict. You use the other side's morality against them. You try to make them like engage in a self-doubt and moral self-searching. And you do it in part by freezing the opponent and turning the opponent into a media figure. You then destroy, you turn the opponent's failings into a media extravaganza, and make the other party's failings into the key issue. And there are a number of other points, but that's sort of an overview of it. So basically, these ideas have been applied, and I think rather tragically, I would say that instead of being used primarily by people who lack power, Alinsky's ideas have been adopted by the political parties and are used now to resolve political conflict, which has escalated the degree of negative emotion in American politics. And a lot of people are aware of that at this point, don't understand why it's happening. But I would argue that although it's happening, I think that there's a very deep consensus in American politics, and a lot of that window dressing is, a lot of that conflict is window dressing, but that's a story for another day. I don't think we need to go into that right here. But in any case, figure 14.4 in your textbook provides a way of visualizing conflict behavior, and it gives a continuum. You know, it kind of gets back to that inverted parabola I was talking about, that at the very low levels, there's no conflict. And a lot of the time there won't be, you know, business hums along, you know, there's no need for conflict. There might be some minor disagreements and people can debate it and argue it. There can also be overt questioning or challenging. In the other class, we were talking about the Socratic method, you know, and I was saying that if you look at Plato's dialogues, and I hope you've read at least one or two of them. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you do at some point, either by taking a real philosophy class. I don't know what goes on in the liberal arts departments anymore. You know, when I took philosophy, we read Plato and Aristotle. I took a class in Plato and Aristotle. I recommend a class like that. It's good. But I mean, if you took a general philosophy class, you probably would have read at least one of the Platonic dialogues. But basically, what the Platonic dialogues do, Plato was a direct student of Socrates, and he kind of, no one knows to what degree the dialogues are Plato's invention and to what degree they're historically true. He uses real figures. So some of the people in the Platonic dialogues are actual historical figures that are known. And it's unclear whether these dialogues actually occurred. Some of them may be recordings of things that are partially true and so on. But basically what he depicts in the dialogues, and regardless of what Socrates really did in real life, the way he's depicted in the dialogues is that there's always a conflict, you know, and this kind of viewpoint is that the truth comes out through conflicting views. And I think there's a lot of merit to it, and it kind of shows you why conflict can be highly beneficial. Is that Socrates starts out by, you know, conversing with some figure who's in the agora, the marketplace where a lot of the elite Greeks would congregate. And these were people from affluent backgrounds who had, for that time, the desired education level, you know, to be an elite person. And he would question some opinion they had, and then get into a question and answer thing where he challenges them every step of the way until ultimately like some new insight is reached, there's new epiphany, and they try to get at the ultimate truth through this question and answer sort of conflictual process. And if you look at the way the Platonic dialogues are usually read, you usually start out with the apology of Socrates. And the apology of Socrates is his defense speech at his criminal trial. And the true, historically true fact is that he was executed, and he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens and diminishing the gods. I forget the exact wording, but diminishing the gods, attacking the gods, if you will. And so for religious impurity and for corrupting the youth of Athens, he was condemned to death by a Greek jury. And there was a jury. And the Greeks, the Athenian juries were mass numbers of people, or like 500 people or more. So it was like huge numbers of people who would vote on guilt or innocence. And he was condemned to death. And I think the message there is that the conflict he created in trying to arrive at the truth caused him to be hated and in turn condemned to death. And this often occurs in history. I mean, another example I might have mentioned is in American history, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, who were staunch opponents of each other and disagreed on ideas, and they both had their own points of view. But it was personalized, and it was turned into hateful political attacks. Jefferson's party became known as the Democratic Republicans, and Hamilton's as the Federalists. And in the end, Jefferson's vice president, who was vice president at the time, killed Hamilton in a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey. And basically, this is another example of the same principle that conflicts of ideas can often devolve into these conflicts of hate. And so basically, negative emotions lead us to oversimplify issues, lose trust, and put negative interpretations on the other parties. So basically, you want to pick the right way to manage conflict and handle it. And so, as I said, the continuum on 14.4 starts with no conflict, goes into minor disagreement, then says overt questioning and challenging. And that was the method of Socrates. And that's the method that you can use to improve understanding and affirm. But then what that can devolve into is what, you start to use Alinsky tactics, and it devolves into assertive verbal attacks and ultimately threats, and then ultimatums, and then ultimately aggressiveness. And it can even be physical attacks, such as happens in warfare. And so the point is that a firm can learn to manage conflict well by adopting a culture that encourages good conflict resolution practice, by teaching people how to resolve the conflict well. And so firms that are highly creative need to be able to do that. And so the more you're able to do that, the more you can be creative. And I think a great firm will view the competition and the disagreement that comes from creative conflict as fun, as positive, as a desirable thing, and that you're playing a game and you don't take it personally. And so conflict, if you're playing a game, like say a game of poker and cards or some such thing, and you're playing a game of Monopoly, it shouldn't become in the end a fight. It should be, you know, once party wins, the other party loses. And you might be frustrated a little, but you don't turn it into that. I hate the other guy, beat me in Monopoly or beat me at a game of poker or something. So basically, that's how it should be in business, that you're able to disagree in creative ways and come up with, you know, and I think this is the kind of skill that Chat GPT will not replace. Um, I don't think you can learn this totally in an analytical level. You need to learn it in a day-to-day practical level. So ways to manage conflict in the firm include policies and procedure, includes bringing lower level people into higher level conflicts and then getting them to learn, socialization and training, and the culture of the firm. Cross-cultural issues add complexity because the two sides have less understanding of each other's mode of communicating, and because there may be less trust, there may be in-group bias. All of these things lead to some difficulties. I just realized I didn't take attendance yet, I don't think, so I will do that now. And I see we have very good attendance today, so I thought a lot of people would be absent because of the holiday, but I guess not. All right. Farhad Abdul.
I'm here.
Hello, Farhad. Um, okay, Ahmed Alcor.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Ahmed.
Hi.
Muhammad Afi.
Here.
Hello. Jenna Bell.
I'm here.
Hello. Joseph Catanzaro.
Here. Here, Professor.
Hello, Joseph. Jiamin Chen.
I'm here.
Hello. Janine Cola.
I'm here.
Hello, Janine. Camilla Cyrus.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. David Estorovsky. David. Marimar Garcia.
Here.
Hello. Monica. Monica's not here. Alexia.
I'm here.
Alexia. Kani Jiang.
Here.
Hello. Yusuf. Yusuf's not here. Georgie Krimishvili.
I'm here.
Hello. Summer. Summer.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. Hong Xian.
Here.
Hello. Hamdi Molly.
Here.
Hello. Ludley. Ludley. Famida Pawari.
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
Hello. Hello. Emmanuel.
I'm here.
Hey, Raquel.
Here.
Hello. Ji Shan Ruan. Jishan. Brendan.
Morning, Professor. Here.
Morning, Brendan. Leah. Todd.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. Stacy Ergiles.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Denasia Warner.
Here.
Hello. Yayin Zhang.
I'm here, Professor.
And Jack Wu.
Here, Professor.
Hello, Jack. Yixuan Zhang.
Yes, Professor.
Hello.
I'm here.
Matthew.
Here, Professor.
Hello. Taryn.
Here.
Hello. Christian. Janaya.
Here, Professor.
Hi, Janaya.
Professor, sorry, I'm here. I'm having
Okay,
some
Christian.
issues with the mute.
No problem.
Thank you so much.
Alexander.
Here.
Hey, Alexander. And Jack Shrem.
Here, Professor.
Okay, I'm just gonna call off the people who didn't answer in case they came later. David Estorovsky,
Here, I'm here, Professor.
Monica Garcia, Hamdi Mali, Jishan Ruwan, and that's all. Okay.
Professor, I'm here. You already
Who-
called my name.
Who is
Hamdi?
it? Ham-
Hamdi.
Hamdi.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I had already called you. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong line. My eyes went to the name right above. Ludley Noel. Ludley Noel. All right. Okay, I had you. I did have you. Don't worry. Okay. All right. So we'll just finish up with the discussion. Okay, so negotiation is a process by which two or more parties communicate and confer with one another to come to a mutual agreement. As I said, it can be distributive or integrative. The best negotiators are good at both. I disagree with George Ross on that. I think if you're really good at distributive bargaining, you're also going to be really good at integrated bargaining. And as Walton and McKersey pointed out, that you're able to transition. The transitioning is part of it. You're able to transition from one to the other. And if you do distributive bargaining, you can engage in like being a hardcore bargainer or being a soft line bargainer, but both could be distributive. So, one thing you can do is have different combinations of offers that you offer to people. One big issue, one big context, let's say, where you can use negotiation tactics is in pay. There's a great book, I was telling the other class, there's a great book by Jack Chapman. I'll put it on the screen, called Negotiating Your Salary, $1,000 a minute, it's called. And it's actually probably an understatement at this point that you can actually make more than $1,000 a minute by negotiating your salary well. When you're offered a job, now what he says is you don't, and this is true whether it's you're going for a job interview and you're getting a new job, or you're going for a job interview and or you already have a job and you got a performance rating and you're now asking for a raise. No matter how you slice it, you don't ask for a raise until you've gotten the offer. Okay, so you don't talk about money in a job interview until you've gotten the offer. Once you've gotten the offer, then you can negotiate salary. And he gives a great technique for how to go about it. The book takes about a half hour to read, maybe a little more. And you can, if you're able to boost your salary by $5,000 or $10,000, that has very important implications, because once you start at a rate, the company you work for is going to base your raises on that rate. And it's illegal in New York now for companies to ask what you're making on your prior job, but it's still going to affect it. I don't care if it's illegal, it's still going to affect it. And the more you're making last year, the more you make next year. And so it affects you for long periods of time. And if, as a result, if you can get a good offer early on, that will keep you at a higher level throughout your career. It lasts until you retire. Economists have done studies of this and actually found that the year you were hired affects your ending salary. So, in other words, people who are hired during recessions, when the pay rates are lower, end up with lower salaries than people who are hired during good times when pay rates are higher. And so I highly recommend studying how to get a good pay offer initially. That's very important. And don't just take the offer they give you. The same when you buy a car, that, you know, the manufacturer's suggested retail price is in most cases negotiable. Some companies have begun to say it's the price is non-negotiable, but I don't believe that. You know, George Ross, when he came to my classes, talked about how he negotiated the price of jewelry at Bergdorf Goodman, buying his wife a ring for their anniversary. He actually negotiated the price of the ring at Bergdorf Goodman, and they said, we don't negotiate, but they did. So basically, to be good at negotiation, now this is very important. Well, one other point I should make is that negotiations in organizations affect relationships as well as economic outcomes. And so when you're in an organization, the approach you take negotiation is going to affect what happens to you. And so that's where collaborative negotiation becomes really absolutely critical. Not that collaborative or integrative negotiation doesn't occur throughout the economy. Most relationships are collaborative. If you buy a tomato from a supermarket, you're both going to benefit from that transaction. So most things that people do are collaborative, and you can build on that. So basically, very important to the negotiation process is planning the negotiation in advance. And the more you know, if you know what the salary ranges are in your field, you know what a realistic offer is, you know what a high offer is, you know what to ask for. And so you need to have information. Preparation is very, very important. You need to have a definition of the ground rules of the negotiation. How is the negotiation going to proceed? You need to clarify your position and justify it. You need to actually go through the process of give and take, making an offer, counter offer, acceptance, knowing what the other party's threat points are, and then arriving at closure and implementation. So in the planning process, you need to understand what the other party's threat points are. The threat points are the most they're willing to pay or the least they're willing to offer. You need to understand the BATNA. BATNA stands for the best agreement to a negotiated agreement. Excuse me. And it's basically the other party knowing what your opportunity costs are, not the other party, knowing what your alternative options are. For instance, if you're working at a job, and you're making 50 and you don't like it, you say, what's my best alternative? What can I do? Let's say you know you can get a job for 40. You probably won't take it because it doesn't pay as well. But what if you know you can get a job for 48 and the conditions are better? then maybe you might say, well, the extra 2,000 doesn't matter that much. I'll be happier. You might decide to take it. So in other words, your best alternative is going to affect whether you take a deal or not. One thing that's important is to give and take in a negotiation, to understand what the other side is wanting, what you want, to educate the other side, and then to reach closure. And some things that affect how good people are going to be at negotiation include personality traits, things like extroversion, openness, honesty. These are going to be good traits for negotiation. So lying in negotiation is not advantageous. Is business bluffing ethical? That was a question that Albert Carr asked in a famous Harvard Business Review article called "Is Business Bluffing Ethical?" Whoops, I did the wrong thing. And what he basically concluded is that it is. That basically saying that business bluffing is unethical is like saying it's unethical to bluff in poker. Business is a game. Business is a game, and if you go into business, you know that you're playing the game, and the game is in part that people bluff in negotiation. And so in advertising, the law says that there's permissible puffery, that you're allowed to exaggerate, but you're not allowed to overtly lie. So you can say this hamburger is hot and juicy, which may not be true, but it's an exaggeration. And so you can't complain because it's expected that people aren't going to believe advertisers' claims. On the other hand, over lying about facts is fraud. And so if you overtly lie about facts, you're going to be committing fraud. And so basically honesty is good, but that doesn't preclude bluffing. People who are likable and ambitious fare the best. Self-efficacy, a sense of competence, leads to success in negotiation. And emotional intelligence is probably relevant to negotiation success. People, your mood may make a negotiation, may make a difference in your negotiation. So negotiators who show anger can induce a better settlement. If you have a reputation for being tough, or if you show anger, you can force a settlement. Having a history of showing anger can make people more likely to give you concessions. Anxiety leads to worse outcomes. So if you're nervous going into negotiation, your outcome is probably going to be worse. Cross-cultural negotiations tend to do best when negotiators are open, avoid time pressure, and encourage learning. So basically win-win negotiation. There are gender differences in negotiation style. Women are less likely to initiate negotiations. The differences are slight, but women can be more competitive in tit-for-tat strategies, and men can be more ethical, more unethical. And so these kind of differences are not huge. So, you can learn to change your style if you think you could benefit by changing. In a social context, integrative negotiation works the best. Now, one last point before I let you go. People like George Ross, a lot of people think that distributive bargaining is the real bargaining and integrative bargaining is a fantasy. But if you look at the real economy, virtually everything we do is integrative. You don't have a free economy without win-win solutions. The reason you buy a tomato at the supermarket is you want a tomato and the supermarket wants to sell you a tomato. And so you reach a deal, and everything is win-win if you do it voluntarily. I mean, you could say you hate your job, but it's you want the job, you want a job. So it's a win-win thing in that you have the job. And so it's better for you to have the job than not to have the job. But so basically, most of what we do in real life is win-win. And the idea of integrated bargaining is that you build on that and you think of creative ways to expand on win-win solutions. That said, we're just about out of time. So have a nice day and tomorrow, and I'll see you on Wednesday, and we'll talk about organization structure. And your discussion board, I moved up the date to Wednesday because of the holiday. A lot of people seem to have not taken off, so I don't know, but whatever, I'll stick to the Wednesday date, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good
So
day.
long. Have a good one.
All right, bye, Professor. Have a good day.
You too.
Professor, I had a question.
Shoot.
One of my asynchronous classes, the professor said that there's an exam this Wednesday, but she hasn't announced the time yet. So I just wanted to give you a heads up in case it clashes with this class. That might be why I'm not present.
Okay, all right. If that occurs, let me know, okay?
Okay.